slowly. So what will most likely happen to those organisms? They will die. Okay, and so that's why evolutionary biology and conservation are very closely related. If you don't conserve the environment, then things are going to die off really quick. Extinction will occur. And that's the big meaning and significance modern day. So I'll just kind of work my way through all that. Let me go through the next one. I just have a quick slide here, just quick definitions that you should be familiar with. You know, evolution. I heard you had one of the questions about what evolution is. It's a change in genetic composition in a population. It's a population. That question, I bet, will show up on the super quiz. I can almost guarantee it.
Sorry, for Mr. Jelly, do you have a highlighter?
Oh,
Yeah, that would be.
Oh.
Wait, I
That's always.
oh.
Thank you.
Then we can highlight.
Thank you.
Okay, so change. Does everybody know what an allele is?
Yeah.
Okay, allele, form of a gene, and so those things change over time, the frequencies of each one. And so evolution is just in a population. Evolution does not occur in an individual species. An individual does not happen, only in a big population. Okay, we're going to get into Hardy Weinberg here after a while. I'll explain a little bit in speciation. The other thing you need to really know about is natural selection. That's the means by which evolution occurs. Nature selects for the best adapted. If you are adapted, you survive. If you survive, you can reproduce. If you can reproduce, you pass your genes on to your offspring. Okay. So that means the best. What's that?
Survival of the fittest.
Survival of the fittest is kind of a little yeah.
Well,
It's
easy
a little
way to
it's an easy way to remember it. It's a very simplified version of it. Okay, and so that's pretty much what natural selection is, and then the adaptations just allow organisms to survive better. Have you seen those star-nosed moles before? You know what those are? They're like these moles that live underground. They have this nose that has like these finger-like projections on their nose. And what they do is, I mean, moles live underground, they're blind, they can't see. And so if they're underground, they don't need to see. But they have these little hairs on their nose and they can feel around, find the food. You know, you have the better hairs, you can find the food, you eat, you survive, you reproduce. You don't have those hairs, you die. And if their environment is destroyed, they have to live above ground, they're gonna get eaten really quick and they're gone. Okay, that's adaptation. Let's see, other things up here, we're gonna talk about Charles Darwin, his theory of evolution. I don't know if that would ever show up on the test, his book, when it was published November 24th, 1859. I have no idea. Yeah, if that date would ever pop in there, if you ever want to know. And so that was his book, and it actually took him about 23 years after he went to the Galapagos, which the whole build-up of it. Was it?
Wasn't like the birds.
Yeah, the finches out. We'll talk about that and kind of see how that kind of works, and some other things in South America. Okay, a little evolutionary history that kind of popped in there. All of these things kind of have occurred throughout time. The first one really was Linnaeus. He did taxonomy. He kind of figured out how things fit together. He figured out, okay, we're going to classify animals over here, plants over here, fungi over here, and so he was able to classify different things just based on physical traits, outward traits that they were adapted to the environment. He was kind of the first one. He was kind of a biologist. Hutton, he worked with gradualism. He was actually a geologist, and what he noticed was that the Earth changed over time. Went from Pangea, billions of years ago, where all the continents were kind of slipped together, and then over time they changed, they spread. And so what Darwin looked at was like, wow, if the Earth changes like that over millions of years, why can't the living organisms do the same thing? And so that's kind of how Hutton kind of helped out, kind of worked with Darwin on that one. Another one was Lamarck. He kind of had really the first idea on evolution. His idea was the use and disuse idea, which meant that if an organism needed a trait, they would develop it, such as why the giraffes got the long necks. They needed to reach the trees up high to get the leaves, so they grew longer necks. And then that trait was passed to the next generation. Also, I read one of his articles, blacksmith, hammering all day long, built up huge muscles, and he figured that that trait could be passed to his sons. It's an acquired trait. Obviously, we have found out that that doesn't occur, but that was kind of the first idea of evolution. Other ones, Malthus, those of you who had economics, probably heard of Malthus, survival, struggle for the fit, what word am I looking for? Materials, limited resources, only certain ones get it. Those are the real important ones that really worked it. And then there's a few other ones like Cuvier and Lyell. And then obviously I threw Darwin in there. We're going to get to Mendel with genetics and modern synthesis here pretty soon. And we'll talk about Wallace also. He helped out Darwin. So that's kind of the whole idea of evolutionary history. Let's see here. What else do we got? Get you hooked up. Okay, now when we get into, this is pretty much just the whole idea of natural selection. What it looks like, this is going to be a big chunk of the superquiz right here. The other part that I just gave you, it looks like a smaller part, but this one right here is going to be a pretty large share of it. So 5 very important things when talking about natural selection. These will always pop up, I hope. The first one is exponential fertility, which means organisms will produce more offspring than are needed. Like fish, they lay thousands of eggs in the hopes that just one will survive, because all the other ones get eaten. So you need overproduction. Then what you have to have is this really stable population size. If the population grows too quickly or shrinks too quickly, those populations will become extinct, and only certain ones will be able to survive. Limited resources, obviously that one is pretty straightforward. You know, there's only so much food, and only the ones that can survive the best will get the food, that are adapted will get the food, they'll survive, and then they can reproduce and move on from there. Individuals vary, we know that's genetics. You have mutations, recombinations, which we'll get to later on. That variation allows certain organisms to survive and others not to. And then that variation is heritable, which means it can be passed to offspring. And so those are the 5 real important things with natural selection. Pretty much, if you just remember, nature selects for the best adapted, that should be fine. I know I'm going kind of quickly through this. So if you have questions, please, I like questions. That's my favorite thing. Okay. A couple of things, I just put a map up here of Darwin when he sailed on the HMS Beagle. And this is kind of the route he took starting up here, and obviously in England, and then he kind of cruised across the Atlantic. He spent most of his time in South America, which is a big, kind of what the activity decathlon's on this year. And so mainly they focus on the Galapagos Islands right here. This is kind of what's always known, which he only spent probably 5% of his time in the Galapagos. He spent a majority of his time in South America, but his finches always come up. Because what happened is all the different islands, there's hundreds of islands in the Galapagos, this archipelago, and each of them has a different environment, different food sources, some are mountainous, some are deserts, and so each bird adapted differently. Some birds have these huge beaks to crush seeds. Other ones have really long ones to get nectar out of flowers. Other ones use tools, like the cactus finch. They can take the spines off the cactus and use it as a little poker, and they can go and use those spines to pull worms out of pieces of wood. And so they've all adapted to different environments. So that's kind of why they use Darwin's finches as an idea of natural selection. Each island is different. Other things that he noticed around here in South America when he kind of got into Patagonia and everything, he was able to collect a lot of fossils from locals of the big megafauna. You know what the megafauna I'm talking about? You know, the huge sloths that were the size of elephants. I mean, these huge animals at the time, you know, 15, 20,000 years ago. And he was able to see those, and then he brought them back with him, and he looked at other ones when he got back to Europe and compared them to the current species, and he saw